And as your assumptions about the freedom alcohol gives you, becomes bigger and more inflated, you begin to consume more. And your wife tells you, honey, you're drinking too much. Honey, you're screaming at the kids too much. You say, no, no, no. Then your mom says, are you an alcoholic? You just, have the smell to you. And you keep denying it for many, many, many years, as most of us do. I mean, we are all intoxicated by some things. It doesn't need to be alcohol. It could be stupidity. It could be porn. It could be video games. It could be, technology, whatever the case may be. And so when you can no longer deny reality, you become very angry because you realize you're kind of held hostage by it. And not only do you begin to have some very harsh judgments about yourself, other people begin to judge you harshly as well. And there's a part of you that accepts the judgments. There's a part of you that wants to get rid of the judgments. So there's a good amount of anger. There are moments of innocence where you receive. There are moments of you just being completely villainous, where you want to kind of just destroy everyone who judges you, including yourself. There comes a point in the third stage where you say, okay, instead of drinking 7 days out of the week for about 5 hours, and when I drink, I become very mean to everyone, I'll just drink 2 days out of the week. That's how you begin to bargain with your intoxication with anything. But you realize it doesn't work. You just have to kind of completely cut away from the thing that has poisoned you. And going from 7 days to do 2 days, it's just not going to work at all. Eventually, you're going to go back being a 7-dayer. There comes a point you realize, and remember, it requires a good amount of will. You have to summon up the courage. You have to see things about yourself that will make you profoundly angry so that you'll be inspired to change, which is almost impossible. Change is really, really, really difficult. And for any one of us in this class who want to change, but you find it difficult, always go back to the great sages of humanity, whether it's Gilgamesh or the Buddha or Jesus. None of these folks were able to find a single disciple, a single student, because every student ultimately goes back to being who and what they've always been. So a teacher can inspire, but they can't inspire change long term. They can inspire change short term. For example, they can come to this class, I can inspire reflection, but the moment this class ends, life catches you, captures you, and devours you. End of it. No more reflection. What happens when you realize you keep trying and you keep failing? You get really, really depressed. Okay. So, and this is again going back to your question about, someone being a narcissist, and if it's a good narcia to have or a bad narcia to have. If someone has gone through these stages, they've come to realize that they were addicted to themselves, life kind of tells them, no, you're not that great. Then they realize they're not that great. They become angry. And then they think that they can overcome their narcissism by simply reading a couple of books. That's how they bargain. But they fail. But now they know too much about themselves. Now they get really, really depressed because despite all the things that have done, they go back to being the sort of scumbag they've always been. If they're able to get themselves out of depression, and that requires a good support system, it requires a good amount of, support system in the way that someone needs to take their physical body, puts them in another environment where they're being advertised a different set of ideas until they become addicted to those sets of ideas. Then they will simply accept the fact that this is their past, They used to be a narcissist, but in all the wrong ways, but now they are narcissists in an educated way. You know, you can't find a more inflated sense of self than the Gospel of John, Jesus Christ. Before Abraham, I was. I am God. I am light. I am bread. I am this. I am that. How could someone love themselves so much? It's because they know. And that knowing does not change. It always remains constant. Sure, you catch him once in a while in doubt, but for the most part, no. So when you talk about someone being a narcissist, the question is, are they being a narcissist in a good way or a bad way? Examined way or an unexamined way? Do parents impose their dreams and hopes onto kids? Do they project? Absolutely. Is it good? It depends who the parent is. As I've mentioned many times in my classes, I had a student about some 20 years ago. He had this father, very mean. This particular fellow was only 3 or 4 years of age. His father was single. His father was angry. He would oftentimes bring prostitutes home. And on few occasions, he would have his 4-year-old engage with this prostitute. And when the 4-year-old would say no, the father would kick him and slap him really, really hard until he did. And then when he came to my class, he was, I think, maybe 18 or 19 or 20. He was angry all the time. When he spoke, people just kind of just leaned back. They didn't want to be around him, around his voice. And I remember running into him accidentally on College Avenue about maybe 15, 16 years ago. He was still the same. And by this time, he was almost 40, you know. So narcissism can take place in a variety of different ways, you know. If on the other hand, you have a father, let me just give you a different example of perhaps a positive narcia. Forgive me if I've said this before. Last weekend, I was at my sister's. My sister used to be a pharmacist. Her husband's a dentist. They're immigrants, both of them are, you know. All of their friends are doctors, without exception. All of them are. And all the kids of their friends, they're all going to Ivy League schools. All of them are. And it's because of their parents, you know. And so it's good to, I think, to have people who have kind of been touched by certain realities of life, to understand the dangerousness of life just in case you move your pieces wrongly, because it can demolish you, you know. And so they kind of impose their own wills on their kids, you know. Sure, you can be in your last year of your medical field, you know, medical program, only to realize, no, you really want to be a poet. Then you walk away. I mean, that's okay too. But for the most part, I think if you're being imposed upon by people who have some experience, some maturity to them, I think it's great. You know, this idea that Freud had mentioned about parents imposing their own unfulfilled dreams onto kids, it's very true. Whose life is fulfilled? Especially our parents who come from a generation where, for many, life was difficult, money was scarce, food was scarce, there was no health care, there was no technology, no one really could afford to buy a car or a house, you know. And it wasn't a time where everybody wanted to be authentic and creative, wanted to be the owner of their own life. None of those things were there. Now, you know, you're like a 5-year-old kid, you look at your parents and say, this is my life, I want to live it the way I see fit. And just in case you spank your kid, well, there is what is that called? SPCA outside of your door, you know, lock. Yes. Yeah, that's right. You know, putting you in a room, you know, or a cage. So the truth is, all human beings have no choice but to be narcissistic. It's impossible not to be. You have no choice but to be self-involved and self-revolve. There is no other way around it. The question is, how mature are you revolving around yourself? What are your desires? Where they come from? So.
So what's the difference between narcissist and confident?
Yeah. Well, if you go back to what we had talked about just a few minutes ago, an 18-year-old is very confident that he or she loves Johnny. They're very, very confident. And they're in fact willing to burn an entire life to follow Johnny to Kansas, And then you as the mother, you sit back and you're watching Johnny from a distance. You're serving tea and dinner and all that. You're watching the interaction between Johnny and your daughter or your son. And you're a 60 or 70-year-old woman. You've been married for a long time. You've been tried by life. You know how difficult relationships are. You know how men are. And so you begin to observe and take notes, take mental notes. And then you look at your daughter when the date is over and Johnny has gone home. You sit her down at the kitchen table and you say, this guy is no good. And you're very, very confident. There is no hint of doubt in any of the insights you're sharing with your daughter. Your daughter is confident that she loves. You're also confident that she's an idiot for loving this man. There are two different kinds of confidence. One has been tested, it's seasoned, it's mature. The other is a bastard. In other words, it has no parents, it has no roots. It has no real foundation, it just happened. You know how a good life is made. No good life is accidental. It takes a good amount of hard work. And after observing Johnny very closely, you realize this is a man whose life is really found on laziness, complacency, immaturity. I like this guy on YouTube. His name is Larry Hahn. I think he had cancer and passed away some years ago. He's a framer. He used to build houses. And he has maybe no more than maybe 5 or 6 or 7 videos. It's because something I like to do, frame and build. And just the way he explains things, the way he holds the hammer, the way he nails, these frames, the way he puts them together. It's just the way he explains things. You know that this is a man who's been around his craft for a long, 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 long time. And there is something profoundly mesmerizing, intoxicating, just sitting back and watching this guy just do things. He's so meticulous, so technical. And he doesn't add a lot of junk, He doesn't wear a skirt and show off his legs so that because of his legs, you're just glued to watching him frame this building, And so there is no fluff. And I think in an age, of course, where everybody is trying to advertise to us cheap ways of getting ahead in life, and they build up your confidence, and then after a few weeks or few months, you realize, whatever house you built, it catches fire and just crumbles. It's an interesting thing about, in particular, I think this culture. In 2008, when the housing market crashed and they realized that there was this balloon that had infected everyone's psyche. Go to the banks, even if you're an immigrant, even if you have zero money in your savings, even if you have no job, make up documents, give them to the bank will give you a credit, will give you thousands of dollars, you can buy a house, and then you pay the mortgage. And all interest rates were adjustable. So you buy a house and the interest rate is 5%. Behind closed doors, some people get together and the following week, the interest rate from 5% jumps to about 12%. So if your monthly payment was about $2,000, now it gets to be $6,000. But now you can't buy diapers for your kids, now you can't put gas in your car, and the job you have is not paying enough. Your marriage goes away, your kids hate you, and then you get depressed and you live in your car. And you realize that you are a victim to a balloon philosophy of life. Now, when you go on YouTube or even on TV, so you have the image of happiness and beauty given to us by Kardashians. You have the image of powerful and stability given to us by Snoop Dogg, by Miley Cyrus. So you have Elon Musk, and you have all these other people telling us what you and I need to do to make money soon, money quickly, be happy quickly, be healthy quickly. And the philosophy that our parents had, which is life is tough, it's going to take you 20 years to save. Have a mature relationship with money, have a mature relationship with alcohol, have a relationship mature with whatever the case may be. And so what you realize is that this idea of confidence in 21st century is like a bubble gum. It's big, but it only takes a tiny little needle to pop it. You know, and I'm not sure if there is a way you can kind of fix that. I think, and I may be wrong, you know, I used to play sports for a good portion of my life. And I know that if you want to be a good boxer, if you want to be a good tennis player, if you want to be a good soccer player, you just got to be on the court about 4 or 5 hours every day for about 5, 6 years at least. You want to be, I'm sorry?
Sorry, I was just going to say, like, naive confidence.
Yeah, it's very much like, you know, the idea of Narcia. You can be feeling really good about all these, you know, ridiculous images of yourself you have because there are a good amount of waves around you and none of the reflections about you is really clear, but you're satisfied. Versus someone who has a clear picture of who and what they are. And these two images are always going to collide. Someone who knows versus someone who simply assumes. And really that's one of the things about, nice things about Socrates, which I don't really recommend for anyone, especially in modern times, because it is quite burdensome, that people can only enjoy life if they are containers of assumptions, and for a good portion, wrong set of assumptions. It makes life work. Assume that you're a good parent, assume that you're a good student, assume that you're a good human being, assume that you're religious. It works. You'll continue to have faith and belief, meaning and relevance. The moment you want to be a bit more educated, you know, am I really a Christian? Am I really a student? Am I really a good father? The question contains so many layers of other questions, and you'll eventually find yourself in complete paralysis. And I go back to the Gospels not because I like religion, not because I like Christianity, not because I like Jesus, but I think it's a life well deserved to study. That here you have some 2,000 years ago in environments that are profoundly religious where there is no diversity, really. Everybody thinks the same, everybody looks the same, smells the same, and talks the same, and interprets stories the same. There is no diversity, and life worked for them for many, many thousands of years, the Jews. For this particular fellow, at the age of 12, if the stories are right, it just doesn't work. None of the stories of the Jewish tradition works for him. It's like none of the stories of Hinduism works for the Buddha. It's like none of the stories of the Bedouin tradition worked for Muhammad. None of the stories that exist in Iraq worked for Gilgamesh. And what happens? Their life, is one of despair. And some of them are lucky enough to kind of finish the journey. They come back and they tell us, their findings. But what happens when someone tells you what they have found and it's no longer filled with assumptions by certain facts? They say, oh, all opinions are good. Everything is relative. It's this modern way of thinking about things. You live your life this way, I'll live my life that way. And then you realize that all forms of communications kind of are fallen now. You can't talk to anyone about anything because all opinions, all positions, all perspectives are valid. And if you happen to be one of those biological evolutionists, the truth is no. Evolution doesn't work that way. Evolution has no respect for diversity. Evolution has respect only for one simple thing. Things that don't work, things that are weak, things that are poison to life, evolution just gets rid of them. And it's something we do all the time. You and your wife on a Saturday or a Sunday wake up and you say, let's clean the house. Do all organisms desire space of their own? Absolutely. Do you see them equally? Definitely not. Some of them, you look and you say, trash. You dump them. The food may be good in the fridge, but you want to clean your house. You get rid of everything. That's biology. That's evolution. Get rid of the things that are no longer necessary. And it's something I think most instructors who are honest do, that initially you walk into a classroom and there are like 40 students. And then you realize, by the second or the third or the fourth week, and if you happen to be really good by the first week, that there is someone playing with their phone, there is someone who's yawning, there is someone who's asleep, there is someone who looks at you, but they're just absent. And after a while, you just learn not to spend energy on the people who are, for the most part, useless. You save your own energy for yourself. You go to your office, you write, you make coffee, you save it for your wife, your husband, your family, your kids, your parents, things you want to do. And just someone who's kind of been useless comes to your office and says, I have a question about ABCD. You know that you should not take them seriously. It's great. So the idea that all positions are relevant and right, they may be relevant to your life, but the bigger picture of life, no. It's great that you hate your father, but continue hating your father and you will begin to hate your husband too. And then you'll begin to hate yourself too. It began with a small hate, So, yeah, be very, very selfish. Be very selfish, but have the right self. And that usually takes a long, long time to figure out. Even if you don't find anything, even if you don't find a self, what you will at least have found is that no one can ever deceive you by talking nonsense to you. You'll catch them very, very quickly. Whenever I walk in the classroom, whenever there is this conversation about love or religion or whatever the case may be, that has some depth, and an 18-year-old raises their hand and says a few things, it's nice that, you have students who want to talk. But when they're bold enough to kind of just talk as if they understand, you realize it's just best to let them talk, get it out, and then silence them. They just have their own concepts. And you can't fight anyone. You can't change anyone if their ideas are ready-made. In other words, if you assume that you're right, we can't have a conversation. Anyone else?
I was wondering is it to live a life and how that compares to what's up?
Compared to what?
Compared to what Socrates says about inheritance.
Instead of talking about Socrates, let me talk about Galileo. And When you read the Old Testament, and this was the case for a few thousand years, so God creates the trees, creates rivers, creates this, creates that, and then he creates human beings. And then he breathes his own spirit into the human being. Not the trees, not animals, not the rivers, not the mountains, human beings. And then he looks at the human being and says, everything you see out there, I made them for you. You're going to have power over anything, everything. Walk on things. They will house you. Do you know what happens to you when someone pays you so much attention, so much focus, they give you so much value, they give you so much? You become selfish. You become the center of the universe. And so the belief was human beings are very, very, very unique. We are made, in fact, in the image of God. We can be God-like. And we did all sorts of things in the name of God. Racism was the product of certain folks have the power to enslave other people. Okay? Because the image of God in those people are absent. In us is fully present. And it was a philosophy that, in fact, was in place for, some time. To kind of digress, what used to be argued, for example, is at the very top of the chain is what you call Caucasoids. Caucasoids are Caucasians, i.e. people who have light skins. Okay. And so, because they had power, they were able to create a sort of philosophy that became the dominant philosophy of life. Underneath the Caucasoids, and remember, Caucasoids defined themselves as civilized. Underneath the Caucasoids were Mongoloids. Mongoloids, people who look like me, and we are not civilized. We are, in fact, barbarians. And the only way you can turn a barbarian into a civilized human being is by getting rid of their philosophy and imposing this philosophy onto them. So yes, I am from Iran, but I will like Miley Cyrus. Okay? And then below the Mongoloids are what we call Negroids, those whose skin color is a bit darker than me. Okay? And these people are no longer barbarians. They are, in fact, savages. So what happens is, if this is the dominant philosophy of life, for example, you begin to internalize what this philosophy is. You don't compare to this. You're not as valuable as this. And before you know it, you have basically no confidence. And it doesn't take very much. It doesn't take very much. If you remember, for example, Prince of Bel-Air, with Carlton and Will Smith. When they were arrested while driving, simply because they were black, they live in Bel-Air. It's a gated community. Everybody's rich. And it doesn't take very much near the end of the movie for Carlton's father, because Carlton goes to his father and says, do you think we were just pulled over because we're black? You really think people are that mean? You think that, racism actually exists? And the father just remains silent and move away. Doesn't say anything. And the point is, it doesn't take very much for the houses you make here and the house you make here, for these two houses to be crushed by this particular philosophy. Now, going back to Galileo does something very, very interesting. Remember, for thousands of years, we believe that we are the very center of the universe. No thing has power over us. Their value exceeds ours. Galileo comes about and says, I made this thing called a telescope. I look into our universe, into our galaxy, and I realize that it's not the sun that revolves around the earth. Because remember, we are meant to be worshipped. You don't revolve around the sun, because if you do, it means you worship the sun. The sun revolves around you. And Galileo flips that, says, no, it's actually the earth that revolves around the sun. There is no stability to the earth. It's always moving, it's always shifting. And he presented his ideas to the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church was not fond of the idea. You know why? We are meant to be at the very top of the food chain. The sun has no power over us. We have power over the sun. Galileo said, no, we are really a speck of dust. We have no idea where we are. It's a big, big galaxy out there. It's a big space, just a single dust. You know. And what happens? After a while, the Catholic Church fractions into two. Now you have Protestants, you have Catholicism. People no longer begin to believe in the laws and rules of the Catholic Church. And they begin to examine. And now you have people who are more depressed. You have people who are more lonely. And this is something that Amir Durkheim, he's a, I think, German sociologist. I think German, maybe not. You know, when the Catholic Church fractured, what happened was that he looked at the Protestant cities, communities, and he came to realize that because Protestants don't gather as Catholics do, because Protestants don't believe in the Pope, Protestants don't believe in the Catholic Church, they don't have to go to the house of God to worship, they can simply do so around the kitchen table. As you lose the sense of community, you begin to become more isolated, more alienated. Now, I suppose the question that you're asking is the following. Is it best to have blind faith in the Catholic Church and continue to believe that you are, in fact, the center of the universe, that God loves you? Or is it best to examine, to realize that Catholic Church doctrines are, for the most part, false? You are not the center of the universe. God doesn't really care for you. Figure out your life the way you want it, the way it best fits you. If you choose the Catholic Church path, the signposts are there. Who are you? A sinner. What must you do? Go to church every day. Why? You get closer to Jesus. Who is Jesus? Well, he holds the key to the kingdom of God. Do you have sex before marriage? No. Are you a man or a woman? Well, pull down your pants, you'll see. Can you divorce? No. Do you believe in Satan? Absolutely. If, on the other hand, you don't believe any of that stuff, you have no signposts, which means that you have to go to Home Depot, buy some 4x4s, buy some lumber, buy some concrete, some rebars, and make the sign yourself. Are we out of time? Well, once again, I rambled on too much. It's good to see all of you. Our last gathering will be on Wednesday, and then we'll go to Zoom. Okay, it's good to see all of you. Thank you.
Good class.